morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Better Place, where we talk with practitioners of international law, loosely defined, and where today we'll continue the focus on business and human rights, a huge growth area in international law and in human rights law and in businesses' social responsibilities. Today, I speak with the amazing Heidi Roberts, a highly regarded workplace relations lawyer. Heidi is the partner for diversity and inclusion and the chair of the Diversity Council at Corrs Chambers Westgarth, a top tier Australian-based commercial law firm. Hello, Heidi.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Let me finish your formal bio and suggest to the audience, tell the audience that you have worked at Corrs for over 18 years now. You've worked across a broad range of activities in the legal practice and strategic business roles. You've advised governments, private clients on a broad range of workplace policy matters, industrial litigation, workplace training programs, and in particular, a huge focus around discrimination, harassment, and bullying in the workplace. You've also done some interesting things internally with Corrs as the national pro bono partner and setting up a business that will, I guess, talk to in a little bit, Orbit Legal Resources. An amazing CV, an amazing body of work, Heidi, and I look forward to getting into it with you.
I must admit, a few years ago, I stopped updating that in her over 18 years of practice, so I don't tell anyone actually how long I've been at Corrs anymore.
It's over 18, right? We don't have to. We don't need to be specific. Yeah. I'm certainly appreciative of that. You are a partner at Corrs, though, for diversity and inclusion. And I was wondering if we could start there. What does that mean to be a partner for diversity and inclusion?
Sure. So in addition to my employment and labour and my ESG practice work, I am the chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Council. So along with the other partners on that council, I lead our internal strategies and initiatives to ensure that at Corrs we are inclusive and equitable across all aspects of our business. So we have some particular streams of work across gender equality, LGBTQI+ inclusion, First Nations inclusion and reconciliation, cultural diversity, disability and accessibility, and we also lead our mainstreaming flexible working program. So it's a busy role.
Yeah, and I'm curious how you frame. Do you ever frame those as human rights issues, per se?
Well, they certainly are. When we look at diversity and inclusion, we're always really working in the context of human rights in their simplest form. Human rights are a set of principles that are designed to realise the dignity and equality of every person. They're concerned with mutual respect, treating others fairly, irrespective of background and social circumstances. So, I always consider that the work we're doing internally and with clients on diversity and inclusion has a foundation in human rights. Human rights, while they've been sort of identified and valued in various ways over history, in a timeless sense, they affirm everyone has dignity and value. They recognise the fundamental worth of every person. They're centrally concerned with equality and fairness and, each person's freedom to make choices about their life and develop to their full potential, and to do that without fear of harassment and discrimination. So that is what our work in diversity and inclusion, but also a lot of the work I do with clients around harassment, discrimination,
right.
And other matters are really focused on. I suppose particularly more so when you look at the economic, social and cultural rights enshrined in the relevant declarations and conventions, things around fair remuneration for work, equal access to education, adequate standards of living, etc., are all really central to what we now look at as workplace or workplace policies or workplace cultural issues.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So that it seems to me that the language of human rights adds to that work. That it contributes an interesting sort of framework of thinking about those issues too.
I think it does, and I think one way I suppose I've seen that in practice is when we talk to clients now about the Respect at Work report that the Sex Discrimination Commissioner did into sexual harassment in the workplace in Australia. You know, you see this transition from a system where employers could be liable if they didn't take all reasonable steps to ensure that their employees were not sexually harassing others, through to quite a different frame now, which is looking at everyone's rights to be able to go to work and not be subject to sexual harassment or sex-based discrimination or perhaps other forms of discrimination, and organisations having to look at, well, what do we do to assess how our culture and our structure and our operations might be drivers of that behaviour, and what do we do to try and build a culture and assess those drivers so that that doesn't happen. And while, you know, that to me is really looking at, in one sense, at how human rights is better informing that approach.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you've touched on both sort of sides of what I understand to be your work, being client focused as well as internal focus, looking at the culture and practices internally at your business, at Corrs. I want to touch on both if we have time. Let's start with the external engagements with clients. You're now a partner in the ESG practice group at Corrs. Everyone has a different introduction to what the hell ESG is. Do you have a unpacking the jargon introduction to what is ESG?
I probably don't, but what I would say is that you know, what we're focused on in our practice is assisting clients to look at environmental, social, and governance aspects of their business. So whether that's from a risk perspective or from a how they're building value perspective, and we try and do that across the E, the S, and the G, and also across all of our legal practice groups. So, you know, rather than I'm going to be leading the human capital side of that practice. So rather than just looking at what are the legal risks in particular circumstances for employers, looking at what are the potential opportunities for building value in your human capital, and if we're going to look at risks, where are the potential sort of adverse human rights impacts? Where might they come from across your human capital or your broader business? And how do you then take quite an integrated look at those risks? So I think one thing that businesses do is they'll risk assess different topics separately. So what is our risk assessment on anti-bribery and corruption? What is our risk assessment on modern slavery in our operations and our supply chain? What is our risk assessment on where the cultural and systemic drivers of sexual harassment or bullying might be in our organisation? You know, where are our environmental risks? But they don't necessarily integrate that into a framework that is then integrated into their governance risk assessments. So, for example, if we're working really hard to minimise our impact on the environment, and one aspect of that is moving to more green energy, which involves quite a significant proportion of green energy, and we look at that on its own, that looks great. And then we go and do our modern slavery assessment. We go, hang on a minute, we've just moved to all this green energy, and we know that the majority of the, you know, inverters and other aspects of those panels are produced in very high risk situations for modern slavery. So how do we balance those up?
Yeah, how do we, Heidi?
Yeah.
So, if I may put a finer point on it. I mean, there has been increasing attention turned to solar panels being produced or having supply chains through the Xinjiang Autonomous Province of China. Credible allegations of forced labour in the production of those. So you look at solar panels. Great tick on the sustainability side of things, or the E of ESG.
Yep.
Yeah, but on the social, maybe a failing grade. How do you balance, or how do you advise your clients to balance between these two tensions of respecting and upholding human rights in supply chains and doing what is perceived as being a sustainable practice?
So I think, the first thing is always to understand the risks as deeply as you can and understand how they manifest in the context of your business. That's always the first place. The second then, I think, is really to work out what leverage and influence you have. So, go back to the UN Guiding Principles. Are we causing? Are we contributing? Are we directly linked? And then look at what steps you can reasonably take. In many circumstances, you might have quite limited leverage. You might be able to, talk to your green energy supplier about what they're doing to minimise those risks. What is the mix of solar, wind, hydro, other things? How is that likely to change? And be really aware of that. And when I think you have the best understanding you can of your risks, you're in the position to work out what you will and won't do. But also then I think to explore ways to increase your leverage. So what could we do as an industry? How can we collaborate with other players? And so there's never any quick, easy fixes to what are very complex and I think systemically entrenched problems. But doing due diligence as a meaningful way of truly understanding risk rather than a process, and then being able to look at risks in an integrated way so that you are being seen to take action across the whole breadth of risk rather than necessarily just picking one to play off the other.
So speaking of one, I guess the Australian government has picked one in a sense, right, with the Modern Slavery Act of all the human rights issues that businesses impact, for better or for worse. A lot of attention in the Australian corporate community is now focused on modern slavery because a few years back we now have a piece of legislation requiring large Aussie companies to conduct due diligence, investigate their supply chains for modern slavery. I know you're neck deep in that work on behalf of clients. Are there any illustrations, any examples of what you're finding on behalf of clients? Do Aussie companies have modern slavery in their supply chains?
We all do. The question is I think understanding what level of risk and where that is in your operations and supply chain, and then identifying, where you've got leverage and what you can do about it. I think a key impact of the Modern Slavery Act has been that organisations have been far more active in building that understanding. So they've been far more active at looking at their operations and their supply chains. Firstly, looking at operations, starting with, hang on, we're in Australia, that's not going to be relevant to us. And then doing the due diligence and the learning they need to do to understand the range of risks that might be in the first tier of their supply chain here in Australia. So I think that's been an eye-opening process for a lot of organisations. And then secondly, in their supply chains, coming to realise we actually have to assume we have modern slavery in our supply chains. And now what we need to do is build an understanding of, what those risks are, but more particularly where they manifest in our supply chain in respect of our suppliers. So I think what we have seen, a lot of organisations have done one or two statements now and are coming into the end of a third reporting period. And where organisations started on a journey of, well, my suppliers are in these kind of geographic areas, working in these kind of regulatory and societal contexts, producing these kinds of goods or services and have done very high level risk assessments, they've now had a couple of years to actually ask questions of their own suppliers and engage with them and come to a view as to whether their suppliers are actually doing enough to minimise risk or not. So we're seeing, I think, that shift from I theoretically know I have modern slavery in my supply chain through to I now have a much better understanding of where the risks might arise in my supply chain, and I can now start doing some more targeted work with some particular suppliers.
And isn't it? And I love that observation, because human rights due diligence is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing commitment, and it's not that we're going to capture and remedy and rectify everything the first go round.
No,
but year on year, incrementally, with the devotion of resources, we can advance that human rights due diligence, not just the risk assessment, but then asking those follow-up questions. What can we do about it?
That's right. And I think it's that movement from due diligence as a process through to an action and an ongoing action. There's no, there's a lot of IT systems that can really help you to do your due diligence and help you to do risk assessment. But in the end, you have to start engaging with suppliers and others in your operations and to understand, what they are doing, and you have to get involved. That can be really hard, and there will always be circumstances where it's going to be very difficult for an organisation to influence. For example, we're all using laptops and telephones, and we've all got equipment that's going to have cobalt in it that has a significant risk of being mined in very unsafe conditions in the DRC. What can we do about that? And looking for opportunities to collaborate, to engage with your suppliers, to look at international or global opportunities to participate in improvement. There'll be a spectrum of things you can do. Certainly, we do see prioritisation. I can actually make a difference here. I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to move into other things. But as we've discussed, over time, with ongoing due diligence and action, you'll be able to move through priorities and identify collaborative efforts that your direct supplier relations might not have given you enough influence to take.
Just like countries don't comply necessarily overnight with all human rights obligations, I think we should also have that incremental expectation for businesses too, rather than instant. So that's great. Can I shift to your the work you do internally, which I know you're really passionate about? I would call you a internal corporate culture change agent. You're well known within Corrs and even the larger Australian legal community as a champion for equity and inclusion. And if I may say, trying to end that old boys club culture that once pervaded big law. So what's the report card? How are we doing? Not necessarily just Corrs, but the Australian legal industry.
As an industry.
Yeah.
So I think a lot has changed, a lot has improved, and there's still some more work to do. Certainly when I arrived as a fresh-faced articled clerk over 20 years ago, I was very surprised to see there weren't very women partners, and I felt a bit naive that I perhaps hadn't thought about that in advance of turning up to a commercial law firm. But I have certainly across my career had great opportunities to participate and excel in legal practice. I was working flexibly before I had children. I think I was made partner and 6 weeks later commenced parental leave. I've worked for many years as a partner flexibly, and I've had teams of lawyers and partners who all work sort of collaboratively on large matters, which I think is actually the model for ensuring gender diversity in senior legal roles, but also all forms of diversity. The extent to which you can work together collaboratively as people come in and out of workforces, either for having children or attending to other caring needs, attending to cultural needs, is really important. So I've seen a lot change. I think that, the last 2 years have, in terms of COVID, have made it really clear that there is still in our society in Australia, and I think all the data shows it too, we still have women as default primary carers. We still have women doing far more of our unpaid home and caring duties, even if they are the main breadwinner for a household. And so we still are, I think, as a society, working towards further improvements. COVID also showed us that while in many extents women, sort of bore the brunt of working at home and caring, and the challenges of insecure roles and not being employed during COVID, we certainly saw a greater increased acceptance of flexible working.
Yeah.
And so I think going forward, we have to really focus on not snapping back to old norms. A big challenge for the legal industry has been, a traditional structure of being rewarded on, the time you're billing or the time you're spending at work. And we've been moving away from that. So I think it's really important that as an industry, we look at, flexible working's here to stay. Our learning and development opportunities and our rewards, our involvement in significant matters is not for the people who happen to be sitting at the desk, and we're going to be really thoughtful. We're going to be really conscious about how we develop our people, and how we engage with each other in work as we continue to really support flexible working. So that's one thing I think going forward.
And a really important message, I think, especially for young wannabe lawyers that are listening to this, and especially young female wannabe lawyers listening to this, that it sounds like it's not a quixotic hope anymore to find that work-family balance, that trailblazers like you, Heidi, have allowed at least the greater opportunity for that to occur now.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we all know that circumstances change as we care for children who grow up very, very quickly, it seems. Lots of people are caring for parents and other adults in their families. Lots of people are caring for members of their families who live with disability. Lots of us, we all need to really focus on our physical and mental health.
Yeah.
So all of us are doing all of that.
Yeah.
I think, one of the things, you've seen emerging recently is significant increases to parental leave policies that make it very clear that parental leave is available where you have a couple in a parenting family, regardless of gender, and to both carers. So it's not about identifying someone as a primary carer and someone as a secondary. That parents in a couple should be able to determine how they share that care. And so at Corrs, we have recently amended our policy so that if parents choose to be at home caring together during the first year, months of their child's life, they can. And I think the really interesting aspect of that is when you set up shared care from the start, when people go back to work, there isn't this kind of, it is assumed that mum, or assumed that the person, perhaps in a same-sex couple, that the person who took the first lot of primary carers leave, it's assumed they'll go back to work and they'll go back part-time and they'll keep doing everything at home as well. If organisations are supporting parents to set those foundations early, then when parents go back to work, they've got a different foundation to start with. So I think while a lot of the work that we do at Corrs is about our people, what I love about it is it has really, potential to really impact social change on a broader scale as well.
Absolutely. I want to dig in a bit of time remaining, Heidi, into a little bit more about Heidi the person, if I may.
Sure.
So I'm curious. You've spoken a lot, and your eyes light up about your work, and you're clearly very passionate about it. Is there a particular aspect of your work that really energizes you today? And on the other side, what really gets you down about your role?
So I love that I can do client work and I can do cultural work at Corrs. I love that mix. Partly because, it's nice to be able to, with clients, influence what's happening out in the community. And also, I suppose when I reflect on my career, I have always had a real interest and passion in terms of the way lawyers work and the way we do our work. And that, combination of my practice area being employment and labour, along with my interest in changing the way lawyers work and improving the way lawyers work, has meant that I've been able to combine practice along with cultural change. I also did set up Orbit, which is our contract lawyer business. And again, that came from that space of, gee, there's a whole lot of lawyers in the market who might not want to be working in private practice or in a corporate group, but have all these skills to offer, and they might not want to work full time. They might want to work in this different way. How can we harness those skills? So I've been able to really combine that across my career journey in a client-facing, but also a cultural change way. Which I think has been I've been really fortunate to be able to do that. I suppose the other thing I would say is I've also been fortunate to work in a firm which has a culture where you can kind of say, I want to give this a go. I want to give this a crack. And I've been given that scope. So it's great to find a place where you can do that.
A bit of entrepreneurial vibe happening. And certainly with Orbit Legal, from what I understand. Fantastic. And the low point, what's getting you down right now, either about your work or the state of human rights in the legal industry or Australia? I'm curious.
I think working in diversity, inclusion and cultural change is always exciting and challenging, because there's always more to do and your work is never finished, and you get really excited about certain improvements. And then you realise, hang on a minute, there's still this that needs to be addressed. And so, you're never going to turn up to work and go, well, gee, I fixed gender inequality in Australia today.
Tick.
Fixed, next thing. Hopefully someone one day will do that. But so I do find it really inspiring and exciting, but I also sometimes feel that, when you're working in a space to try and change, big and important issues, that there's always more to do.
Call me presumptuous, but I suspect that the position head of diversity and inclusion didn't even exist at Corrs when you were a law student. I'm curious about that Heidi trajectory. What was your first gig out of law school?
Like, I seriously did come to Corrs and I'm still here. But I'll say it a different way. We did so I did start at Corrs as an articled clerk and did all my rotations. I did quite a bit of work on royal commissions and in litigation, and then in employment, and settled in employment. My early career was very focused on industrial relations, strategy and litigation. And then over time, as that landscape changed, I moved more into human resources advisory work, working for overseas organisations who were large here, but not large enough to have a significant HR function. So I would sort of do HR function and legal advisory. And then slowly that sort of morphed more into sexual harassment, discrimination, workplace bullying and harassment type advisory, as in training and prevention and cultural risk assessment, along with investigations. And in doing that, I started doing a lot more work, moving into risks of modern slavery. So it's sort of, and in the meantime there, used my interest in how lawyers work to do orbit. I then actually took a year off. I took 18 months off and just took a mid-career break. My husband was studying overseas. My kids were sort of 4 and 6, and we thought, gee, what a great time to go on a little adventure. So we lived in Boston for a year, and I didn't work. By then I think I'd been a lawyer for 15 years, and it was just time for a little rest. I love being a lawyer. I love working at Corrs. It takes a lot of energy and a little career break. I don't count my 2 lots of parental leave as career breaks before that, because they were very busy in another way. But a little career break to, go to art galleries, study a little bit of art history. I did a little, study group at Harvard on art history and politics, something I'd never sort of thought about before.
Had a few drinks of Sam Adams, maybe.
Yes, that's right. Went to the Red Sox and took the, we did a lot of weekend trips while we were there. And then to come back and really focus on what I wanted to do. And at that point, I did talk to Corrs and said, I really want to come back and I really want to do diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
We have had a few diversity partners before that. I think we started with our first diversity partner probably in 2010-ish. So we'd had a significant gender equality and other diversity program running at Corrs for many years. But I decided it was something I'd really like to invest in. So when I came back from that career break, my focus has really been diversity and inclusion and the more sort of human rights based aspects of our employment and labour and more recently our ESG practice. So careers certainly do develop over time.
Yeah.
And I suppose my tip for everyone coming out of university would be just take all the opportunities you can. Look after yourself, eat well, exercise, sleep, spend time with family, and then otherwise just all these little opportunities that come up, take as many of them as you can, because, there's so many different ways your career can go.
That's fantastic advice. That absolutely, I second. How do you relax? You deal in your working life with some really heavy issues, Heidi. Do you have a favourite way of relaxation?
So I've more recently started, as in the last sort of 2 to 3 years, started a little bit of hiking. I'm not serious hiking. I don't carry packs, for example, and camp. But I do quite a bit of day hiking or sort of weekend hikes that manage to stay in more comfortable accommodation than a tent. So I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I do like to go to football. So I'm a Geelong Cats member.
Boo.
And I've got 2 little boys. One's a Cats member. And so we do like to sort of go to the football when we can.
I'm so sorry that you picked such a crappy team.
Going okay this year.
Yeah. I'm a Collingwood fan.
Oh dear, how can you say that? Because we just... Anyway,
I know, I've got all my teeth too.
I don't want to date this podcast by referring to last week's game, but...
Anyway, we threw you a bone. It's going to be downhill from here.
We took it.
Anyways, this has gone a different direction than I thought. Yes. 2 super quick questions, what I like to call lightning round. What's your favourite ice cream, Heidi?
I'm going to do what all lawyers do and not answer your question. I have a favourite ice cream shop, Hooly Doolies in Geelong. Warren Ponds is the first sort of chain store of Dooley's ice cream in Apollo Bay. And so you need to get to Apollo Bay or Warren Ponds for a Dooley's ice cream.
Right. Okay. And I was wondering, do you have like a favourite human rights or a law movie or book that has really inspired you?
I think it's sort of a more recent one. I really enjoyed On the Basis of Sex. So the story of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and particularly the case that she ran in, in respect of sex discrimination law. So I really
Yeah,
enjoyed that one.
the notorious RBG. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And so going on from that, I guess, I think career heroes, mentors are really, really important to forge a career. It sounds like you've had some really supportive leaders in Corrs that supported and encouraged your career. I'm more than happy for you to shout out those in particular, but also, do you have any heroes that are not necessarily in particular in your life, but that heroes that inspired you and it continue to inspire you to continue to do the work you do?
So I think I don't really have a couple that I would sort of name by name, but as I worked through, my career at Corrs, I've really connected with partners who I felt sort of showed the values that I thought were really important in practice. So there've been a number of partners along the way who I knew were, excellent technically at the law, excellent strategically with helping clients achieve what they're trying to achieve, and at the same time were able to be really, respectful and inclusive to their team members, manage their time so that they, were spending lots of time with their families and, sharing that with us. And so at various points throughout my career, I always have had 2 or 3 of those partners that I really watched and engaged with to understand how they were operating. I've sort of, always had in the back of my mind, when I'm finished with this, I want people to say, I really enjoyed working with her. And so I've always really made an effort to connect with, engage with, and have as my mentors at Corrs partners who I felt were sort of, behaving in that way in their technical legal career and the way they worked with others, that I could learn from that. And when I found things challenging, I knew that I could go to them and get some good advice.
That's awesome. So important. To close, just two questions. One on, I guess, on process. One on substance. What's the future of business and human rights writ large, in your opinion? Just
Look,
a short little.
Yeah, I think we're going to, in the short-term future, see far more organisations taking far more seriously a broader view on what they're doing in their operations and how what they're doing in their operations might be having adverse impacts. I think we're definitely at that stage of moving from, is it really my legal obligation to do something about this, through to what kind of impact do we want to have and should we do something about this?
Yeah,
Is that short enough?
Yeah, that was shorter than I expected. But so much, that's deep. Thanks, Heidi. And you offered some advice earlier to students, and as you know, there'll be a fair few students. We hope that listen to this interview. I thought your advice was brilliant. And we could just cut and paste to here. But I was just curious, to close, was there any further advice to students in the formal and informal sense of law, of human rights, that want to emulate your career, perhaps?
So I think the last thing I would say about that is being absolutely disciplined in the technical practice of law is the start of everything. I meet lots of students who have really inspiring goals for what they want to achieve in their career. And I think there's lots of opportunity to work in law to make a real difference. But the foundation of that is technical legal skill. And building that has to always be your first focus. Also, I think, be a little broad-minded about where you might get that skill. Commercial law is one area that I think a lot of people say, oh, that's not what I'm interested in. But it is actually an area where you can get a really good grounding in technical legal practice, but also working with organisations, with businesses, is actually one avenue where you can have an impact on human rights, when you can work with organisations that are really interested in factoring in their potential impacts on human rights. It's a space that you can see change. So I think, focus on the discipline, get the technical basis right, and then perhaps be a little broad-minded about where you might have impact.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant advice. Thank you, Heidi. Heidi, let me just close by saying thank you. Thank you for the interview, but more importantly, thank you for all the impact that you are having from your role at Corrs, not just on behalf of your clients, but also in the Australian legal industry.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me. I'll be really interested to have a listen to some of the other episodes.
Thank you, Heidi. And let me close with my refrain. Thank you for making the world a better place.